Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and this is the podcast where we interview experts from around the world on subjects such as leadership, communication, diversity, communication challenges, and much more. Before I get into today's interview, I'd like to invite you to see how your presentation skills are doing by taking our free 4-minute quiz. If you go to speakforresultsquiz.com, that's speakforresultsquiz.com, you can take our free 4-minute assessment, and that's where you can see where you are strong with your presentation skills and where perhaps a little bit of support could get you the results you need and the recognition that you deserve. If you score high enough, you will rate a free conversation with me to talk about how to apply those results. Meanwhile, today, I have the great honor of having Jen McClure as my guest. Jen is someone I've known for some time, and I follow her religiously on her various posts and the wisdom that she shares with the community. She's an executive and a board leader with more than 3 decades of experience in media, technology, and information services. She is the founder and CEO of GEM, and serves on the advisory team of BoardWise and is a program director and distinguished principal fellow emeritus of the Conference Board's Marketing and Communications Center. Wow. Jen has been named a power player and a top disruptor in management consulting by Business Insider. She's considered to be one of the original authorities on digital and social media and is a respected leader with a track record of identifying important businesses, technological, and societal trends. We had a really interesting conversation, mostly focusing around communications, stakeholder capitalism, the need for transparency, and how to get more diversity onto boards. We talked about all sorts of things, and I think you will really enjoy this conversation. So now on to the interview with Jen McClure. Jen McClure, welcome to Speakers Who Get Results.
Thank you.
You know, I've known you for some time, but we didn't really have a conversation for a while, although I've been following you for quite a while and just love the various things you have to say. And so I've been kind of saving you up as someone I could bring on to dispense some wisdom to us all.
Well, thank you so much. I'm excited to chat with you.
Well, before I ask you the many, many questions I have for you, let me start with, who would be your dream interview? If you could interview anybody, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who should be listening?
Well, I'll go really personal really fast. My dream interview would be my birth mother. I am adopted and grew up with a wonderful set of parents. And my mother always said, you can do whatever you want to do. You know, when I was born in 1964, so that wasn't true when I was born. And she made it clear that those were not among her choices necessarily. But I was raised with the idea that there would be no glass ceiling by the time that I was an adult. And I totally believed that. And
too.
I think it was very aspirational on her part. And she also did what I think a lot of moms did and still do, which is to live vicariously through me, you know, and try to push me to be everything I could be, which I very much appreciate. And my parents gave me the opportunities through education and support and lots of travel and reading and love of all things.
This was
learning.
your adoptive mother you're talking about.
Yes, my mother.
Yes.
Now, much later in life, I have discovered quite a bit about my birth mother. I know who she is. I know what she's done with her life. And I also know what she looks like, which is exactly like me, and younger, when she was younger. And it has given me a real sense of myself. I have now, I think, at least a better perception of nature versus nurture.
Okay.
And I think she was a professional woman in the 1960s. She was a single woman. She made a really difficult choice. Because you talk about speaking, I know that she was one of the first women to make a very large presentation in an industry setting, and that was rare then. And so I would like to speak with her to understand more about her and more about myself and what translates, even when you don't know someone, what gets passed on. And also, because I do think she had to make a very difficult choice at a time when women were asked to make even more difficult choices than they are necessarily now, about what was acceptable in society, about what their role was in society, about who they had to please, and what does she now think about that in her late 80s? Wow. That would be my dream interview.
Would you have anybody listen?
Probably not.
Probably not. Okay. Well, it's really interesting. This is a question I ask all my guests, and how often people, I have a whole category called ancestors, people who would like to interview their ancestors. I think about when my grandmother died, I was 24 and I was living on the other side of the country, and I was so involved in my new life in New York City. I really wish I had known her better as an adult, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to have anyone listen to that conversation. And what I will say is that, now being an adult and having friends that have adopted kids, and particularly a lot of adopted kids that are of a different race or ethnicity than the parents are, and the kinds of questions that come up from them, from the kids, from the people they know. There's something that adopted kids share about identity, and a questioning about identity. Where did I come from? Who am I? Why am I like the way I am? Why do I feel like I don't belong in the family that I am living in? That is not always acknowledged or addressed or appreciated. And so that's it's nice to be able to share that with people who have that same feeling. And so
yeah. Fascinating. Well, thank you. If you ever do talk to her, I'd be curious to hear when you're ready, if you're ever ready to talk about it. Jen, we were talking earlier about leadership in a changing world. And with all your experience, your board experience and management consulting, that's easy to say, but what really is it? How can we boil it down in the time that we have?
I feel like every conversation we have about business and leadership, we have to talk about COVID. And so we'll couch this in COVID a little bit, but I do think there are other factors that are leading to a change in the world of work. And unfortunately, women, as we know, have been more impacted by those changes than men. And that has become apparent again with the most recent Deloitte survey, which they just conducted for the second year.
That's the Women at Work
survey that just came out very recently. And women are really struggling at work. But I also want to talk about the opportunities that I think we have, particularly for women communications professionals and women that are good communicators. And I don't like lumping into stereotypes around gender too much, but I will say that there is a general perception that women tend to be better communicators than men. And what we have seen in our management consulting practice, that with all of the changes to people being sent home to work during the worst of the pandemic, with often uncertainties about when people will be coming back to the office for multiple reasons, sometimes because there's new variants, sometimes because there have been employee surveys which indicate that people want to continue to work from home, or they want a different kind of working relationship with their employers, that the role of communications has become more important than ever. And the role of professionalized corporate communications has become more important than ever and has started to be more valued. So the rise of the chief communications officer in organizations is increasing. The increase on boards of understanding the role of communications and the effectiveness of communications, measuring the effectiveness of communications, enabling leaders to be better communicators and managers to be better communicators, presents an opportunity for women. More than 60% of corporate communications professionals are women. But by the time you get to the chief communications officer, like in many professions, it's 40%. And
yes.
And so that's obviously frustrating to me.
Let me pause you here for a minute, because you keep talking about communications, but I think a whole lot of my work is about helping women communicate, helping men and women communicate with each other and understand the differences. It's not just masculine and feminine. I think of it as single focused versus multi-focused. So when you're talking about communications, can you break that down a little bit and define it? What are you talking about when you're talking about communications? Internal, external? What do you really mean?
In the digital world, there is no such thing as only internal. So if you're in communications, you know that things that are internal will go external. There is also now a real push to have employers be more transparent, for leaders in business to take stands on issues that traditionally companies would not have taken stands on: social issues, environmental issues, equity issues, political issues. And so there's a need for clearer communications internally, with the understanding that those communications internally will probably go external, whether you intend them to or not. And so it's a competency that everyone needs to have, that we do need to understand, to your point, that different people, different genders, different cultures communicate differently, that sometimes, particularly in digital communications and in written communications, things don't necessarily land the way you intended them to.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And so being able to have the skill set to be clear and concise and transparent and straightforward, but then also to make sure that what you think you said is understood in the way that you intended it. So those are all communication skills that are important, whether you're talking about internally, externally, one-on-one communications, communications in the boardroom. Those are verbal communication skills as well. You can say something in a setting, in a meeting setting, that you want to ensure is being perceived the way that you wanted it to be perceived. And I just think that in this time, we are all understanding that the need to be more communicative, more transparent, to be sensitive to how we're communicating with each other is more important than ever. And the demand from the new generation of workers coming in is that there will be more transparency, and there will be more communication, and there will be not only more communication to them, but there will be interactive conversational communication.
Well, yeah, that brings me to my next question: is where does listening fit into this?
It is the most important aspect of communication. When I was leading digital communications at Thomson Reuters, internal and external, and we were moving to an intranet platform, which was really our new way to work together and really moving to a very collaborative way of working together. I remember training our internal communicators to say, you are no longer the mouthpiece of the organization. You are no longer the mouthpiece of your leaders, just writing their statements and pushing them out to our employees. You are the eyes, the ears, and the enablers of conversations.
Ooh,
so
I like that. Yeah.
Listening to what conversations are happening, being able to see that on a platform, an open platform like an intranet or social media, if you're external, understanding what conversations are happening that matter, that there is a reason why you should insert yourself in those conversations, what questions are being asked in those conversations, and how can you add value to that conversation? And I think that's a really good set of questions, well, for anyone to ask in the course of their lives. We're not just spouting off. But also as leaders are being asked to weigh in on more social, political, environmental, these hot topics that, what is our role as an organization? What is my particular role as this leader in this setting at this time? Is it relevant? And can I add value by participating in this conversation? And so for some organizations that maybe be getting pushed to have an opinion or make a statement on a certain topic, it's a good way to say, we do not play in this area as an organization. Therefore, we're not going to make a public statement. There's reasons to talk and there's reasons not to talk or to write or to have an opinion.
Oh, say that again. Reasons to talk, reasons not to talk. Yes.
Or to state an opinion. And also we have to understand that in many cases now saying nothing is also a decision and an action that sometimes needs to be defended. So the nuance around communications that are perceived to be the opinion of an organization, a company or nonprofit organization or political party or whatever, those need to be defended, whether you are saying something or not saying something, and of course, what you're saying. And so I just think the communications professionals are more important than ever, and communication skills that everyone needs to have are more important than ever.
This is fascinating. What can you do if you're a communications professional and the person at the head of the company is tone deaf, is just not listening, not responding, saying things, blurting out? I've just been dealing with this with one of my clients has a senior executive who is really trying and just doesn't get it. What can you as the communications person do?
It's unfortunately a somewhat common problem. And I think there are some things you can try to do. One is to measure and show the impact of what they're saying on different audiences. Another is to, and I think the power of social media, if this is an external communication, to be able to bring that kind of data back in. Here is the feedback that we are seeing from people because of what you said. You can do that internally too, depending on what platforms you're using and channels for communication. You can use surveys. Are employees understanding these messages? You can, if you have a social intranet, you can start to look at comments and things like that. You can also do training, real true speaker training that will better enable them, hopefully, to continue to improve. And there are some leaders who don't care.
Yeah.
They're gonna, and I guess I wouldn't call them leaders at that point, but there are some senior executives or people in places that are, are influence that don't care what they say and how it's going to land, that's what they're going to say. But you can do the best you can. We like to say with one of our clients, equip, enable, and empower them to do a better job, and talk to them about how important it is that leaders are good communicators and the importance of their influence over all the different stakeholders that they serve. This came out in the Edelman Trust Barometer most recently this past year, is that employers are the most employers are the most trusted institutions now in the country.
Really?
And yes, and the leaders of those organizations and employees are the most trusted people. The least trusted, by the way, are journalists and scientists and government officials and government in general. So in the perceived gap that where government has been perceived to have failed, corporations stepping in. So let's take COVID again for, putting together initially the PPE and getting it out into the world, being so quick to develop vaccines that are highly effective. And that the perception is that corporations are our next best hope for real action, and that they therefore have become very trusted organizations. Well, to be a trusted organization, you need to have responsible leadership that is able to communicate, listen, to your point, listen and communicate and continue to earn that trust over time of all the stakeholders, their employees, their customers, their investors, the general public of which they serve. So hopefully, if you put that into the context for that particular leader, they will understand the weight of their words.
You do a lot of board work and a lot of it's board advisory work. Can you talk to us a little bit about how important, what a good board should do and how important it is? Because there's such a range of requirements and also then I'm going to aim for, and why there should be more diverse voices on boards. So
traditionally boards, and particularly corporate boards and public boards, there were a couple of things that people thought they needed to be responsible for: hiring and firing the CEO and returning shareholder value. Bottom line, shareholder value. In today's world of stakeholder capitalism, which we can agree with or not agree with whether that should be the case, that stakeholder capitalism exists, and I would argue speaks directly to traditionally, bottom line results, right? If we know that consumers are increasingly making their decisions based on the values of a company, and they want to support and align as investors and as consumers with companies whose values they share, if we know that employees want to work for companies that have values that they can stand by, then that's going to impact the bottom line. So stakeholder capitalism is real. Let's just say that. Therefore, boards governance expands because we need to think about things like employee engagement and retention, the company's or any organization's commitment to DEI, and I would say the additional B, belonging, particularly
diversity, equity, inclusion.
Diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. That would previously not have been seen as board's purview. That's HR. It's not about HR because it's about the culture of the company and any organization's ability to fulfill its mission and goals. We need to think about digital risk. This is something that I teach a lot in the board certification program that I teach. We need to think about reputational risk. We need to think about ESG, and not just for public companies.
And define that for our international.
Environmental, social, and governance issues. Increasingly, institutional investors are asking that public companies report on certain ESG metrics, and they are pulling institutional, which is the largest component of investment, from companies that do not meet certain standards. The SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, is now pushing to have private companies be more transparent. And whether or not this will happen, there is a push on behalf of the SEC that private companies should be more transparent about their financials and about their ESG positions.
Mhm.
So there are a wide range of things that boards now need to consider. And traditional board members, and the ways that traditionally boards have been brought together, which is who you know,
Yeah.
or friend of the CEO, friend of the existing board members, will result in a fairly homogeneous board. And things being said, like what I experience in my world of focusing on digital, is that's not our role.
Mhm.
All we need to ask is if there is a CIO or a CISO, which is Chief Information Officer or Chief Information Security Officer, and then it's not our job. It is the CEO's job to make sure they're doing their jobs. That does not portray a realistic understanding of the way that organizations work and the way that technology is brought into or managed within a company, particularly a large company. And what it really is saying is, I don't know the right questions to ask. So I'm going to use the noses in, fingers out mode of board governance, which is good. That is important to know what is operational versus oversight. However, you don't use it just because you don't know the right questions to ask. And I think that's what too often is happening on boards. And so it's not just about having a board that looks different, which is very important, to have diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging on the board. But it's not just racial, ethnic, gender diversity and cultural diversity. It's also diversity of expertise and new kinds of expertise, like communications, like human capital expertise, like maybe someone from the specific world of DE&I, which is kind of a subset of HR, right? With digital or cyber expertise, because all of those things are core to the success of a company. And so those are new areas of skills that offer opportunity for women, if you have that skill set, and that are different than the traditional job role that you would see for a board recruitment role, which would be CEO, CFO, public company board experience, prior company board experience, which is often that barrier. And so there has been some shift, but there's room for more consideration about people who can bring the right perspectives and expertise to diversify the board, to round out maybe the lack of experience and perspectives that sit on that board that may not be people that have had a lot of prior board experience, or may not have had that CEO role, which is just going to uniformly eliminate a lot of women, because a lot of women have been public company CEOs. So that automatically takes them out of the running if that's the criteria that we're using.
So Jen, you were saying earlier that that even with communications officers, it tends to be mostly women until you get to the top 10% or something. Certainly I've saw for years in my opera career, operas tend to be a lot of people who are, opera companies are run by a lot of people who are passionate about it and don't get paid very well. So you have lots and lots and lots of women until you get to the top, and then there's a man. And I've seen the same thing in business really up until the last few years. How should we as women, as professional, smart women, how can we think about the glass ceiling? It's certainly still there. What can we do to break through it, thin it out? It should disappear. I wish it would.
Yeah, and unfortunately, based on this survey that I mentioned earlier by Deloitte, the glass ceiling is even more challenging right now because of more people, more women working remotely and being perceived that they're getting left out of the loop, that they may be passed over for promotion. And that's probably a feeling that's quite real. So I think what we can do is continue to advocate for one another, continue to put our hands up
as women,
and hopefully our allies as men too. Is if someone's not in the room that should be, or they're the person on the Zoom screen, but they're in a hybrid meeting. Let's not go back to the old adage that we've all experienced is, well, I said something, but then when the guy said it, everyone said, oh, that's a great idea. Right? So let's do that with our Zoom colleagues too. I'd say women and men, but you're less likely to be heard and probably less likely to be acknowledged for those good comments, or maybe even less likely to speak up if you're in those hybrid meeting settings. This new world of work is not going away. And so we have to all figure out how to be more sensitive to including our colleagues, women, men, non-binary people, all of our colleagues, in making sure that we get heard because we're confident enough to speak up regardless of where we are, and that we are supporting our colleagues to be heard when they should be heard and acknowledged when they should be acknowledged. I think it is going to take some more confidence on behalf of women. I know that many of your other guests, you've talked about this, is being comfortable with yourself, putting your hand up, asking for what you want, applying for jobs that you know you can do and roles that you know you can do. Going back to the original example of in corporate communications, you reach a certain amount and then it's all of a sudden it's the majority of those top roles are men. That applies to many professions, as you said, is asking why. I was more qualified. I've been here longer. I have been doing this role. Why was I not chosen? And making sure that you have made it known that you want that top role. And there are assumptions being made about, oh, women have too much on their plate now with COVID. They're taking care of their kids. They're doing this. They don't want to come into the office. And dispelling the myths that we can't make our own decisions about where we are going to spend our time and how much we can accomplish, as opposed to having assumptions drive those decisions about how far we're
one
able
of the
to
one of the assumptions that I find, I learned this when I was studying with Kimmy Avery, who was the person who's taught me the most about the different sort of two different styles of communication, is how often women will drop hints without actually asking for what they want. And then the single focus person doesn't understand that was a hint and doesn't respond. And then the woman says, oh, they hate me. They hate me. My manager hates me, has never actually given me that promotion that I wanted, when she hasn't actually asked in a way that the manager can hear it, which is a mistake that I made over and over and over again.
I think a lot of us do as women. We don't want to be perceived as pushy, right? Because we've been told that's not attractive. So being clear, being concise, being transparent. Also, I think we have to watch that he doesn't like me, she doesn't like me, assuming positive intent so that we don't get defensive. And really checking ourselves and saying, was I clear about what I wanted or what I was trying to say? And asking for what you want, and also not letting people make assumptions about how much we can do. I was talking with another board member recently. Actually, I think it was a presentation that you were participating in, and so you probably heard her say this too, is she was talking about wanting to join a board, and a man said to her, well, boards are a lot of work. Would you say that to a man? Probably not. And she said, Riley, don't tell me how much work I can take on. I know exactly what my capacity is. And that's something we need to be comfortable saying back to someone when they're making assumptions about who we are and what we can do, is please let me decide or let me prove to you, or I've already proved to you what I can do. And having that confidence to be able to do that. And unfortunately, in a more and more virtual world of work, where we're going to have to speak up for ourselves a little bit more than we already have.
Well, Jen McClure, it's been such a delight to have you as a guest here on Speakers Who Get Results. I do believe it's going to be several years before we settle into a new norm. We're still in the middle of massive change. So I think I'm going to have to circle around, 6 months or a year from now and get you to come back and talk about us again about what else is happening, because who knows where we'll
be. New norm. We might be doing this in the metaverse the next time we.
Who knows? Who knows? Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a delight to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored, and I hope this was helpful. And I enjoyed our conversation.
It was very helpful. So this has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host. And let me remind you, if you're curious how you are doing with your presentation skills, you can take our free 4-minute assessment at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where in 4 minutes, you can see where you are strong with your presentation skills and where a little support could get you the results you need and the recognition you deserve. This has been Elizabeth Bachman. I'll see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.